A former elite sniper seeking a quiet life on a remote farm with her daughter is forced to confront a ruthless gang determined to take everything from her. But when her past catches up and secrets resurface, she realizes the real threat isn't just outside, it's within. The early morning sun cast a warm, golden light over the rolling fields of the Harlow family farm. Claire Harlow stood near the barn, a hand resting lightly on her hip as she surveyed the property. The earthy scent of freshly tilled soil mixed with the faint sweetness of hay, a combination that had come to mean home for her over the years. Nearby, Emma's laughter rang out, a delightful sound that broke through the usual quiet of the countryside. Claire smiled to herself as she caught a glimpse of her 6-year-old daughter darting between stacks of hay bales in the barn. With her wild curls and untamed energy, Emma was a whirlwind of life and joy, a constant reminder of why Claire had chosen this quiet life after everything she'd been through. She knelt by the vegetable patch, carefully inspecting the growth of the tomatoes. The simple rhythm of tending to the land always grounded her, offering a sense of control and peace that had once felt unattainable. But today, something felt off. A faint unease settled over her, prickling the back of her neck like a warning. As she straightened up, her gaze drifted toward the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. There, just beyond the edge of the property, she spotted them, faint tire tracks etched into the earth. Her brows furrowed as she stepped closer, her boots crunching against the gravel. They were fresh, too fresh to be from the mail truck that came by earlier in the week. Claire crouched beside the tracks, her fingers brushing the grooves. A flicker of tension passed through her as a shadow crossed the ground nearby. She rose quickly, her eyes narrowing as a group of figures emerged from the tree line, their presence stark against the otherwise serene backdrop of the farm. The man leading the group exuded a predatory confidence. His leather jacket caught the sunlight, glinting as he strode toward her with a swagger that set her teeth on edge. His companions, a motley crew of rough edges and sharp glances, followed close behind. Claire's grip tightened on the gardening tool in her hand, though her expression remained composed. "Claire Harlow," the man drawled, his voice carrying an edge of mock politeness. "Nice place you've got here." She didn't respond, instead letting the silence stretch as her gaze darted to Emma. Her daughter had stopped playing, her curious eyes fixed on the strangers. Claire motioned subtly for Emma to stay put before turning her attention back to the man. "I don't believe we've met," she said finally, her tone calm but firm. He smirked, taking a deliberate step closer. "Name's Marcus Kane. Me and my friends here are interested in this piece of land. Seems like you've done pretty well for yourself. But I think it's time you moved on." The words hung heavy in the air. Claire's jaw tightened as she squared her shoulders. There was no mistaking the threat beneath his seemingly casual demeanor. She glanced at the group behind him, their postures relaxed but their eyes sharp, assessing. "I'm not selling," she said evenly, her voice carrying a quiet steel. Marcus chuckled, the sound low and unsettling. "See, that's the thing. I wasn't really asking." A stillness settled over Claire, but her calm exterior belied the storm brewing beneath. The years she'd spent leaving her past behind now seemed to crumble as instincts she hadn't used in years began to resurface. Her mind was already calculating options, mapping out contingencies. "Leave," she said, her tone cutting through the tension like a blade. Marcus's smirk faltered for a brief moment, but he recovered quickly, signaling to his group. "We'll be back," he promised, his voice a dark whisper of what was to come. As they disappeared down the road, Claire's gaze lingered on the tracks they left behind. The piece she had fought so hard to build now felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. The fight was coming. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farmhouse. Claire sat on the porch steps, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the worn wood. The confrontation with Marcus Kane lingered in her mind, stirring something she had buried deep, a past she had fought so hard to leave behind. Inside, Emma's soft humming filled the air as she played with her dolls at the kitchen table. Claire watched through the window, a pang of guilt settling in her chest. She had promised Emma a life far from violence, far from the chaos Claire had once known. And yet danger had found them, creeping in like a ghost from another life. Claire rubbed her temples, the familiar weight of old memories pressing in. Her mind drifted back to the desert heat, the sharp crack of gunfire, and the cold calculation required to survive. As a sniper in the Green Berets, She had been trained to observe, to assess threats before they materialized. The look in Marcus's eyes earlier had been unmistakable. He was dangerous, and he wasn't bluffing. "Mom?" Emma's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Claire turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, her blue eyes filled with curiosity. "Who were those men?" Claire forced a smile, hoping to reassure her. "Just some people passing through, sweetheart, nothing to worry about." Emma studied her mother intently, her small face scrunching up in thought. "You're worried," she said softly. "I can tell." Claire hesitated. She had always been careful not to let her past touch Emma's innocent world, but the cracks were showing. "Sometimes grown-ups worry, but it's my job to keep us safe," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Why don't you get ready for bed? I'll be up in a minute." As Emma nodded and disappeared down the hall, Claire let out a slow breath. She rose to her feet and walked toward the barn, the familiar creak of the old wooden door greeting her. The scent of hay and leather filled the air as she moved toward the far end, where an old wooden workbench stood. With a deep breath, Claire reached beneath the workbench and pressed a hidden latch. A soft click echoed in the quiet barn, and a concealed compartment slid open. Inside, a black case lay untouched, a relic of a life she had left behind. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment before she opened it, revealing the contents within: her rifle, meticulously maintained, and a handful of other weapons she had hoped never to use again. The weight of the sniper rifle in her hands felt both familiar and foreign. She traced the barrel with careful fingers, memories flooding back unbidden, dusty landscapes, silent nights spent watching and waiting, the weight of every shot she'd ever taken. Claire clenched her jaw and set the weapon down. Her reflection in the small mirror hanging above the workbench caught her eye. The woman staring back at her wasn't just a farmer, she was still a soldier underneath it all. She had tried so hard to forget, to embrace a quieter life for Emma's sake. But now the past was knocking, demanding to be acknowledged. A faint rustling outside made her tense, but it was only the wind stirring the tall grass. Even so, Claire felt the undeniable truth settling within her. She could no longer ignore who she was or the skills she possessed. If Marcus and his men thought she was just another helpless farmer, they were in for a rude awakening. Closing the compartment, Claire returned to the house, one final glance at the barn lingering in her mind. Emma was already asleep, her small form curled beneath the blankets. Claire leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter with a fierce protectiveness burning in her chest. Tomorrow she would prepare. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and hay as Claire stepped out onto the porch. A sense of unease had taken root overnight, gnawing at her like a persistent ache. She sipped her coffee slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. The silence felt heavier today, as if the land itself was holding its breath. A sudden commotion from the barn snapped Claire to attention. The distant sound of hooves pounding against the ground sent a chill down her spine. She set her mug down and rushed toward the barn, her heart hammering in her chest. The sight before her stopped her cold. The pasture gates hung open, swinging lazily in the wind. Several of her cows were already scattered across the fields, their frantic moos echoing through the morning fog. Broken wooden planks and trampled crops painted a clear picture. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately. "Damn it," Claire muttered under her breath, racing toward the barn. Inside, the damage was worse. Sacks of feed had been slashed open, their contents spilling across the floor like an abandoned feast. Tools were strewn everywhere, some broken, others missing entirely. Her once neat and orderly barn was now a scene of chaos. A small, frightened voice called out, "Mom?" Claire whirled around to see Emma standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Her wide eyes darted across the mess, fear creeping into her expression. "It's okay, sweetheart," Claire said, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "Go back inside, I'll take care of this." Emma hesitated but obeyed, disappearing into the house. Claire exhaled slowly, her fingers curling into fists as she surveyed the destruction. There was no doubt in her mind. Marcus and his men had done this. It was their way of sending a message, a cruel reminder that they weren't going to back down. A low rumble of an approaching vehicle made Claire's stomach twist. She stepped outside just as a black pickup truck rolled up the dirt road, stopping a few yards away. Marcus Kane leaned against the hood with that same infuriating smirk, his men lingering close behind him like wolves waiting for the kill. "Nice morning, isn't it?" Marcus said casually, his eyes sweeping over the chaos. "Looks like you've got a bit of a mess on your hands." Claire's jaw tightened. "Get off my land." Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender. "Now, Now, no need to get all worked up. I just came to remind you about our little arrangement. You've got 48 hours, Claire. Pack up and leave, or things might get worse. His tone was light, almost conversational, but Claire could hear the underlying menace in every word. She felt the old instincts stirring again, the ones she had suppressed for years. She stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Marcus, with a cold, unwavering intensity. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice like steel. "This is my home." Marcus chuckled, but there was an edge of irritation in his expression now. "Suit yourself," he said, pushing off the truck. "But don't say I didn't warn you." He motioned to his men and they climbed back into the truck, tires spitting dirt as they sped away. Claire stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at her hair. She knew what she had to do. This was no longer about avoiding conflict. It was about survival. She turned and walked back to the house, her mind already racing through possibilities. Inside, Emma was watching her with silent concern. Claire knelt beside her daughter, brushing a hand through her hair. "Everything's going to be fine," she said softly. "I promise." But deep down, Claire knew the fight had only just begun. Claire moved through the farmhouse with a focused determination, her mind already several steps ahead. The time for hesitation was over. Marcus Kane had made his intentions clear, and if he thought she would fold under pressure, he was dead wrong. She stood in the kitchen, pulling open a drawer and retrieving a worn notepad. Sitting at the table, she sketched a rough map of the farm, marking key areas. The barn, the vegetable fields, the pasture. Years of military training kicked in effortlessly, analyzing every vantage point, every possible defensive position. She wouldn't let them take what she had built. Emma sat across from her, legs swinging under the chair. "Mom, are we in trouble?" she asked softly. Claire forced a reassuring smile. "No, sweetheart. I just need to make sure everything is safe, like when we check the locks before bedtime." Emma nodded but didn't look convinced. Claire reached across the table, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "I need you to listen carefully, okay? If anything happens, I want you to go to the special place we talked about and stay there until I come get you." Emma's eyes widened. "The hideout?" "Yes," Claire said, her tone firm. "Promise me. I promise," Emma whispered. That was enough for now. Claire ruffled her daughter's hair and sent her upstairs, her heart aching at the weight of responsibility Emma shouldn't have to bear. Once she was sure Emma was busy, Claire moved swiftly. Out in the barn, she worked with the quiet efficiency of a soldier preparing for war. She reinforced the doors with heavy planks and secured the windows, placing thick bales of hay strategically as makeshift cover. The old tool shed held more than just farming equipment. Hidden beneath a false floor, she pulled out a crate of supplies she had stashed away long ago. Inside, she found tripwires, a few flashbang grenades, and her trusted combat knife. She carried the gear back inside and made her way to the cellar beneath the house. Pushing aside sacks of potatoes, she uncovered a metal hatch, her last resort bunker. Claire lifted the lid and peered inside. It wasn't much, but it would keep Emma safe if things got out of hand. Returning upstairs, Claire retrieved the black case from the barn and set it on the kitchen table. The rifle gleamed under the dim light. She cleaned it meticulously, her hands moving on autopilot as memories surfaced. Silent nights on missions, the weight of her rifle steady against her shoulder, the quiet exhale before a shot. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to an old name, one she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Jake Mercer. If anyone could help, it was him. Reaching into the depths of the storage closet, she pulled out a battered military radio. She flicked it on, static filling the room. Adjusting the frequency, she hesitated for a heartbeat before speaking. "This is Shadowbird calling Dustman. Jake, if you're out there, I need you." The radio crackled in response, but there was no immediate answer. Claire's grip tightened, frustration gnawing at her nerves. She repeated the call once more, then set the radio aside, knowing patience was key. If Jake was still listening, he'd come. As the sun set, Claire stood at the porch, rifle in hand, her eyes scanning the darkening landscape. The wind whispered through the fields, but Claire heard something else. The distant hum of an engine. They were watching, waiting. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering outside. Claire took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had survived worse, and she would survive this. The low rumble of an approaching engine broke the early morning silence. Claire stood on the porch, her rifle resting against her shoulder, eyes locked on the dust cloud rising from the dirt road. Her grip tightened involuntarily as the vehicle rolled to a stop near the barn, a beat-up, army green Jeep that carried more than just memories. Jake Mercer stepped out, his presence filling the quiet space like a storm rolling in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged face etched by years of hard living, he looked every bit the soldier she remembered. His dark eyes scanned the farm with a practiced gaze, lingering briefly on Claire before offering a slow, knowing smirk. "Nice place you've got here, Harlow," he said, closing the car door behind him. Claire crossed her arms, keeping her expression neutral. "Didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I," Jake admitted, pulling off his worn leather gloves and tucking them into his belt. "But when you dust off an old call sign, it usually means trouble." Claire motioned for him to follow her inside. The kitchen felt too small with him in it, memories pressing against the walls. She poured coffee without asking and set the mug in front of him. "I take it you've been keeping busy?" she asked. Jake shrugged, taking a slow sip. "Freelance work, security gigs, nothing like the good old days." Claire leaned against the counter, watching him carefully. "Marcus Kane, you know him?" Jake's expression darkened. "I've heard of him. Ex-mercenary, runs with a nasty crew. What's he want with you?" "My land," Claire replied, her voice clipped. "He gave me 48 hours to leave, destroyed part of my crops, scattered my livestock. He'll be back." Jake set down his coffee with a soft clink. "And you're planning to stay?" Claire nodded. "This is my home. I won't run." A heavy silence settled between them. Jake studied her, the edge of something unreadable in his eyes. "You could have called the cops." "And wait weeks for them to do something?" Claire shot back. "No, I know what I'm up against." Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Same old Claire, always handling things yourself." She ignored the comment. "I've set traps around the perimeter, fortified weak points, and there's a safe place for Emma if things go south." Jake's brows lifted slightly at the mention of Emma. "She doesn't know, does she?" Claire's gaze hardened. "No, and I want to keep it that way." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her in silence for a moment. "All right," he said finally, "I'll help, but we do this my way." Claire crossed her arms. "Your way means kicking down doors and taking the fight to them. That's not an option." "And waiting for them to hit us again is?" Jake countered. "We hit first, take them off balance." Claire shook her head. "We make them come to us. We know this land better than they do. We use it." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Always the tactician," he muttered. "Fine, but if things go south, we do it my way." "Deal," Claire said, the tension easing just slightly. A knock on the door made them both freeze. Claire's hand instinctively went to the pistol at her hip as Jake moved toward the window, peering out. "It's just Emma," he said with a smirk. "You always were a little jumpy." Claire shot him a glare before stepping outside to meet her daughter. Emma's eyes flickered to Jake, curiosity lighting up her face. "Who's he, Mom?" "An old friend," Claire said, glancing back at Jake. "He's going to help us for a while." Emma smiled shyly. "Hi." Jake gave a small nod. "Hey, kid." Claire watched the exchange, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar. Relief, maybe. Whatever lay ahead, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The night settled over the farm like a heavy blanket, thick with tension. Claire stood near the barn, eyes fixed on the tree line where darkness pooled like ink. Beside her, Jake crouched low, his rifle cradled in his hands. The two of them had spent the better part of the day refining their defenses. Tripwires, hidden spike traps, and a carefully planned escape route for Emma, should things take a turn for the worse. Claire's pulse thrummed steadily as she whispered, "They'll come soon." Jake's eyes, sharp and alert, flicked toward her. "You always did have good instincts," he murmured. "Let's hope they haven't gotten rusty." Claire didn't answer. She couldn't afford doubt. Not tonight. Then it came. The distant growl of engines split the silence, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Claire tensed, gripping her rifle tighter as Marcus Kane's convoy rumbled down the dirt road, stopping just beyond the front gate. A voice carried through the night air, arrogant and filled with menace. "Claire, I'm a man of my word. Your time's up." Claire stepped forward just enough to be seen, keeping her expression cold and unreadable. "You're trespassing, Marcus. Leave while you still can." Marcus's laughter rang out, echoing off the barn walls. "That's cute, Harlow, but we both know how this ends." He signaled with a flick of his hand, and chaos erupted. 3 men rushed the barn, kicking open the doors, but Claire's traps worked like clockwork. A flashbang ignited in a burst of white light, sending the intruders stumbling back, disoriented. A moment later, a tripwire sent one crashing to the ground, groaning in pain. From her vantage point near the farmhouse, Claire took aim, exhaling slowly before pulling the trigger. A single shot rang out, striking the tire of Marcus's truck with precision, sending it lurching sideways. Panic rippled through the group. Jake took his position behind a stack of hay bales, firing controlled bursts at the advancing men, forcing them to take cover behind the rusting equipment near the barn. "Nice shot," he muttered under his breath. But Marcus wasn't deterred so easily. He barked orders, and 2 of his men flanked the house, attempting to cut off any escape routes. Claire cursed under her breath, adjusting her position to cover the back entrance. Inside the house, Emma sat hidden in the underground bunker beneath the kitchen floor, her small hands clutching her stuffed rabbit. Claire had told her to stay put no matter what happened, and Emma had nodded bravely, though Claire could see the fear behind her eyes. A sudden explosion of glass from the kitchen window snapped Claire's attention back to the fight. One of Marcus's men had made it inside. Claire swung her rifle to the side and fired, the bullet lodging into the wooden frame just inches from the intruder's head. He scrambled back, retreating in panic. Jake, meanwhile, had moved to intercept another group attempting to breach the barn. With practiced ease, he took them down one by one, using his knowledge of cover and positioning to outmaneuver them. Marcus, however, remained outside, watching the scene unfold with unsettling calm. Claire locked eyes with him through the haze of dust and gunfire, and in that moment, recognition dawned in his expression. "So it is you," Marcus murmured, almost to himself. A twisted smile curled at the corners of his mouth. "I thought you looked familiar." Claire's stomach churned. He knew who she was. The realization brought a fresh wave of unease, but she buried it down, keeping her focus razor sharp. As Marcus retreated into the darkness with his remaining men, Claire knew this was only the beginning. He would regroup, come back stronger. Jake jogged over to her, wiping sweat from his brow. That was too close. Claire's jaw clenched. It's not over yet. The house was eerily quiet, the aftermath of the attack settling into an uneasy stillness. Claire stood by the window, watching the dark horizon, her rifle resting in her hands. She knew Marcus wouldn't give up so easily. He was calculating, patient, just like the men she had faced in the past. Jake leaned against the kitchen counter, cleaning his sidearm. "They're regrouping," he said, his voice low. "Next time, they'll come harder." Claire nodded, her mind already racing through possible scenarios. "We need to be ready." But a gnawing unease had taken root deep inside her. Something felt wrong. A sudden rustling from upstairs made her freeze. Her heart clenched as she turned, her feet moving before her brain could catch up. She raced up the stairs, throwing open Emma's bedroom door. Empty. The window was open, curtains billowing in the cool night breeze. Claire's stomach dropped. "Emma!" she called, panic rising in her throat. No answer. Jake was right behind her, his face darkening as he scanned the room. "Damn it," he muttered, rushing to the window. His sharp eyes caught something outside. Tracks. They took her. Claire's world narrowed into a single, brutal truth. Marcus had her daughter. Without a second thought, she bolted down the stairs, grabbing her gear with practiced efficiency. Every second counted. She forced herself to focus, channeling the cold, tactical mindset she had once mastered. Panic wouldn't bring Emma back. "Tracks lead west," Jake said, already heading out the door. Claire followed, adrenaline surging through her veins. They moved quickly through the field, the damp earth soft beneath their boots. The faint glow of a taillight in the distance confirmed their worst fear. Marcus and his men were getting away. "We can still catch them," Jake urged, his voice clipped. Claire's grip tightened on her rifle. "We don't rush in blind," she snapped. "Marcus wants me off balance. If we make a mistake, Emma pays the price." Jake swore under his breath but nodded. "So what's the plan?" Claire crouched, studying the tracks in the moonlight. "We follow, keep our distance, find out where they're holed up, then move in smart." A memory surged forward. Years ago, a botched mission overseas, an innocent life lost because they had acted too hastily. She wouldn't make that mistake again. They moved swiftly, shadows against the tall grass. Claire's sharp gaze tracked every footprint, every broken branch. her mind processing data like a machine. Jake stayed close, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with grim determination. As they approached a dilapidated cabin on the edge of the woods, Claire signaled for Jake to stop. She crouched low, eyes scanning the area. The faint glow of lanterns inside revealed silhouettes moving. One of them, small, fragile, was Emma. Claire's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter, bound to a chair but otherwise unharmed. Marcus stood nearby, speaking with one of his men, his posture relaxed but confident. "He's expecting me," Claire whispered. "He's using her as bait." Jake frowned. "Then what's the move?" Claire's mind raced through possibilities. A frontal assault was too risky. Emma was too close to the danger. Stealth was their best bet, but Claire knew she couldn't do it alone. "I'll create a diversion," she said finally. "Draw them out, make them think I'm going in head-on. You get inside, get Emma." Jake looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if this goes south..." "It won't," Claire cut in, steel in her voice. She slipped into the darkness, moving like a ghost around the perimeter of the cabin. As she positioned herself behind a rusting truck, she allowed herself a single thought. "Hold on, baby, I'm coming." Claire crouched behind the rusted truck, her breath steady despite the firestorm of emotions raging inside her. Every muscle in her body screamed for action, but she forced herself to stay patient. Rushing in blind would only put Emma in more danger. From her vantage point, she could see Marcus pacing inside the dimly lit cabin, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the fear clawing at her chest. Emma sat tied to a chair in the center of the room, her small face pale but determined. Claire's heart clenched, but she couldn't afford distraction, not now. Jake's voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "In position." Claire nodded to herself, her grip tightening on her rifle. "Good, I'll draw them out. Wait for my signal." She took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and then fired a single shot into the air. The reaction was immediate. Marcus stiffened, signaling his men to move. Two thugs rushed outside, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the darkness for the source of the shot. Claire smirked to herself, silently retreating deeper into the tree line. One step at a time. Inside the cabin, Marcus remained unfazed, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the back of Emma's chair. "Looks like your mommy's finally ready to play," he muttered, a sinister grin curling on his lips. Emma glared at him, her voice small but fierce. "She's going to make you sorry." Marcus chuckled, running a hand through his slicked-back hair. "Oh, I'm counting on it, kid." Outside, Claire moved swiftly, setting up the next phase of her plan. She knelt by a cluster of dry brush and lit a small fuse, sending sparks skittering into the night. Within seconds, a fire bloomed, smoke curling into the air. The men outside shouted in alarm, rushing to contain it. "Now!" Claire whispered into the earpiece. Jake moved like a shadow, slipping into the cabin through the back door. His steps were silent, practiced, and within moments, he was at Emma's side. "Hey, kiddo," he murmured, cutting through the ropes with his knife. "Ready to get out of here?" Emma's eyes lit up with relief, but she nodded silently, following Jake toward the exit. Meanwhile, Claire remained on the offensive, taking down one of Marcus's men with a well-placed strike as he passed by her hiding spot. The second guard spotted her too late. She had him disarmed and unconscious within seconds. Marcus, sensing the shift, pulled his gun and aimed it toward the door just as Jake and Emma emerged. "Not so fast," he snarled, stepping forward. Claire stepped into view, rifle trained on him. "Let her go, Marcus!" He smirked, his finger twitching on the trigger. "You're good, Harlow, I'll give you that. But we both know you won't risk your kid." Claire's gaze hardened, and without hesitation, she fired, not at Marcus, but at the unstable wooden beam above him. The shot split through the support, sending debris crashing down. Marcus dove to the side, cursing, giving Jake just enough time to get Emma clear. Claire advanced slowly, keeping Marcus pinned under her scope. "You made a mistake coming after my family," she said coldly. Marcus sneered, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Claire fired a warning shot near his feet, forcing him to scramble backward into the wreckage. "Stay down." With that, Claire turned and ran, catching up with Jake and Emma as they disappeared into the tree line. The fire spread rapidly behind them, engulfing the cabin in thick smoke. Emma clung to Claire's hand, tears threatening to spill, but Claire squeezed it reassuringly. "I've got you, sweetheart. We're safe." Jake glanced over at Claire, impressed despite himself. "Damn, Harlow, you really haven't lost your touch." Claire didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the dark horizon. This fight wasn't over yet. The early morning fog clung to the landscape as Claire and Jake moved swiftly through the dense underbrush, Emma safely nestled between them. The cabin fire had bought them time, but Claire knew Marcus wouldn't stay down for long. He was relentless, and she could feel him closing in with every passing second. Claire stopped near a narrow canyon that cut through the landscape like a jagged scar. She motioned for Jake to follow her, leading them toward a concealed overlook where she had stashed supplies days before. Beneath a carefully placed tarp, she revealed a small stockpile, explosives, spare ammunition, and a field radio. Jake let out a low whistle. "You've been busy." Claire didn't look at him. "I always have a plan." Emma hugged Claire tightly, her voice trembling. "What now, Mom?" Claire knelt down, brushing a hand through Emma's hair. "I need you to stay in the bunker, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about? No matter what happens, you stay there." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she nodded bravely. Claire kissed her forehead before guiding her toward a narrow opening in the canyon wall, a small cave hidden by thick brush. Emma crawled inside, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby," Claire whispered, forcing herself to step away. Jake handed Claire an earpiece. "You sure about this? Marcus isn't an amateur. He'll smell a trap." Claire checked her rifle, chambering a round with practiced ease. "He doesn't know this land like I do. He'll come straight through the canyon." She pointed to a narrow choke point. "We force him there, cut off his escape, and end this." Jake sighed. "You always did like the long odds." Claire smirked faintly. "They usually work." As if on cue, the distant growl of engines echoed through the valley. Claire tensed, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Marcus was coming, and he wasn't alone. The convoy rolled into view, 3 vehicles, headlights piercing through the mist. Claire watched through her rifle scope, picking out Marcus sitting smugly in the lead truck. He wasn't the type to let a grudge go. He wanted to end this personally. Jake shifted beside her, readying his weapon. "We do this smart, Harlow. No heroics." Claire exhaled slowly, her mind slipping into the calm precision of combat. Just stick to the plan. As the vehicles entered the narrow canyon, Claire triggered the first explosive. A deafening blast erupted, sending debris crashing down behind them, cutting off their escape. The gang reacted instantly, leaping from their vehicles, weapons drawn. Claire took her first shot, hitting one of Marcus's men square in the chest. Jake followed suit, firing controlled bursts, keeping them pinned. Marcus barked orders, his voice rising above the chaos. Then silence. Claire's heart pounded as she scanned the dust-filled canyon. Suddenly, a shadow moved to her right. Marcus. He had flanked them, his gun aimed at her head. "Drop it!" he ordered, his smirk widening. "Did you really think you could outplay me, Harlow?" Claire's mind raced. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Jake inching closer, but Marcus was too close, too ready. Claire met his gaze, seeing the cruel amusement in his eyes. "You made a mistake," Claire said, her voice steady. "You took my daughter," Marcus sneered. "And what are you going to do about it?" In one fluid motion, Claire dropped her rifle, grabbed the hidden knife from her boot, and lunged. The blade sliced across Marcus's arm, making him curse and stumble back. Jake seized the moment, tackling him to the ground, wrestling the gun away. Claire stood over Marcus, her eyes cold, unrelenting. "It's over," Marcus laughed bitterly, blood trickling from his lip. "For now." Claire didn't hesitate. She knocked him unconscious with the butt of her rifle, breathing hard. Jake looked at her, impressed. "Remind me never to cross you." Claire turned away, already thinking of Emma. "Let's go home." The morning sun painted the farm in soft hues of gold, casting away the shadows of the past few days. Claire stood on the porch, sipping her coffee, watching Emma chase butterflies across the open field. The laughter of her daughter, light and carefree, was the sweetest sound she had heard in a long time. Jake emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Repairs are coming along," he said, nodding toward the partially rebuilt fence. "You're lucky most of the damage was superficial." Claire smiled faintly. "Luck had nothing to do with it." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, I guess not." He studied her for a moment, then added, "You thinking about what's next?" Claire's gaze drifted to the horizon. "I'm thinking about today, about making this place safe again." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You know where to find me if you need backup." Claire extended a hand. "Thanks, Jake, for everything." He shook it firmly. then walked to his Jeep, throwing a final glance her way. As the engine rumbled to life and he drove off, Claire felt a strange sense of peace. She had faced her demons, and now she was ready to truly live. The story of Claire Harlow teaches us that no matter how much we try to escape our past, it has a way of shaping who we are. Strength isn't just about physical survival, but about protecting what truly matters: family, love, and the life we build with our own hands. When faced with impossible choices, would you have stood your ground like Claire? Or would you have walked away to keep your loved ones safe? Click on the video on the screen to continue your journey of self-discovery and find out what it truly means to stand up for what you believe in. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.